Good morning, everybody, and happy 1st of March and St. David's Day. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. For those that don't know me, my name's Alex Makinson, and I will be taking you through today's webinar, which is an Academies financial update. As always, we're going to start with the housekeeping. Hopefully you can all hear me, but we do have a telephone number and some access codes and a webinar ID on the screen. Please do just jot it down. If you do lose audio, you can dial in with your mobile phone and you can still hear me. Hopefully we won't have any technology issues today, but this is a live webinar. It's not pre-recorded. So if we do lose internet, obviously we lose the webinar. It will be recorded and the recording will be sent out to you after the event. So if you do have to leave or we do have a technology issue, you can still watch it back at your leisure. Now, you're more than welcome to ask any questions throughout the webinar. There's a chat box in GoToWebinar that you can put in. However, being a typical bloke that I am, I struggle to talk and click buttons, never mind answer questions all at the same time. I'm an awful multitasker, I'm afraid. I will try my best to answer the questions as they come through. If not, I will come back to you with an answer to every question at the end of the webinar, or I'll email you directly. Equally, you are more than welcome to drop me an email. My email address is on the screen. Please feel free to ask any questions, drop me an email about anything. There's no such thing as a silly question. And as I said earlier on, the webinar will be recorded. It will be sent to you along with the slides. Most of you present today, I think, already know me, so I'm not going to labour on the point of the slide here. You know who I am, you know my area of expertise, and that's why I'm here talking to you today about academies. And equally, a lot of you know the firm that I'm a partner of and our area of expertise when it comes to the academy sector as one of the leading providers to academies across the area. Now, we have got a jam-packed agenda for you today. I say jam-packed agenda, it's mainly one item on the agenda, but there's a lot of things to go through. I'm going to keep you for around about 40-45 minutes, all being well. If I overrun, please don't shoot me, but equally I may talk quick today and we may get it through it all a little bit sooner. Let's see how we get on. The main focus on today's and this morning's webinar is actually our lovely 2024 benchmarking report. We're going to go through a lot of information on the benchmarking report. You can see what the trends are. You can see whether there are any unexpected surprises from what you're hearing that we have found. And obviously, you can use that report at your leisure to go and see how your trust, your schools compare. I have snuck in a few other things into the agenda today, just because I like to talk about a number of things on my webinars. I'm going to spend 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes, talking about trustees' reports. I'm going to talk about benefits in kind, just because it's a hot topic at the moment and you may want to know about them and you may want to consider them. And then if we've got time at the very, very end, I'm just going to run through some of the up and coming deadlines so you don't miss anything. So hopefully we'll get through all of that in the 40-45 minutes, fingers crossed. So let's start with our 2024 Academies Benchmarking Report. Now you can download your free copy of the report from the website. We do have hard copies. I've got a hard copy in my hand here. If you want a hard copy, just let me know and I will send a hard copy in the post. They're nice, they're glossy, they're wonderful. You can read it in bed if you really want to, or you can download the electronic version from the website. Again, all free, all comes as part and parcel of what we do for you. So obviously feel free to have a little look. What does the benchmarking report contain? Well, we are hugely proud of this year's benchmarking report, to be honest with you. We're always proud of the report we do here for schools and academies, but this year does seem to be exceptional. The information contained within the report is huge. There is so much data in there. It's not just about numbers. There's lots of things that are visual in there that enables you to actually have a look and see what's going on and see whether it can help you, your trust and your schools. You can see from the content slide in front of you here now, we split it up into sections, everything from the financial position, governance, multi-academy trusts, income, costs, balance sheet, and internal audit and risk management, along with all of the raw data. So the analysis that you can plug in your schools, your trust to see how you compare to some of the income, some of the costs, some of the balance sheet values to see whether there's a concern or something that you need to look into. Now I'm going to start with the key highlights of the benchmarking report. And first of all, I'm going to tell you this is our 12th report. I couldn't believe when I read again that this is the 12th year that we have done this. It just seemed like yesterday that we had Academies, and actually we've been doing this report for 12 years. And the first few years we actually didn't do reports because there wasn't that many Academies, so therefore benchmarking was a bit of a waste of time. So it just goes to show that it really has been a journey over the last 12 years or so for everybody, and let's hope we get another 12 years, if not more, of these sort of reports. Now, within our benchmarking report, it represents just under 300 trusts and just over 2,300 schools. There is a huge amount of information contained within the report from an awful lot of trusts and an awful lot of schools, really. We are only one of, I believe, 3 accountants across the country that do the benchmarking report. Why? Because of numbers. Obviously, we represent a huge amount of trusts, actually more than 300 and more than 2,300 schools, but they're the ones we've reflected in the report today. Now then, the first slide I've got here is about financial performance. And I'm going to use my pointer quite a bit today. Hopefully you can see it on the screen and there isn't too much of a lag between what I see and what you see. What we're looking at here on the screen is the financial performance, the surplus and the deficit for the years on average for the trusts across certain categories. And we have categorized trusts into 5 areas: primary single academy trusts, secondary single academy trusts, small multi-academy trusts, mediums, and large. Now you're probably wondering what's the definition between a small, medium, and large. Small is less than 3,000 pupils. Medium is between 3,000 and 7,500, and large is anything over 7,500 pupils. Now, what's this telling us on this graph? Well, I'll cherry pick the large just because it's the bigger numbers, really. In 2023, the average surplus for a large multi-academy trust was £267,000 compared to 40 for a medium and 9 for a small. But that's not the bigger picture. The bigger picture here is what you can see across every single type of trust, which is the in-year surplus has dropped significantly compared to the previous year. It doesn't matter where you are, where your trusts sit, where your schools sit within those trusts. The average this year has been the amount of reserves that you have carried forward into the following year has fallen off a cliff. I think that represents how much last year was a challenging year. And we are talking about the year ending 31st of August 23. So this data is quite recent really here when it comes to benchmarking. So if you were thinking last year was a very, very challenging year when it comes to your financials, well, you're not the only one. And everybody's had a challenging year. And this slide clearly represents that challenging year and how bad last year was compared to the previous year. I'm just going to look at this large mapped average again. You know, an in-year surplus of more than £1.5 million on average 2022, and now for 2023, only £267,000. That's a massive percentage drop. Just moving on to the next slide and some of the other key highlights that we've got. And I will go through some of these in a bit more detail. On the left-hand side here, we're talking about trust deficits. And for the last few years, those trusts that have unfortunately had a deficit have been chipping away at them very, very nicely. They've been coming down quite significantly. In 2019, 8.2% of trusts had a deficit. At the end of 2022, it was less than 1%. Now that's gone up again this year. Again, the representation of the previous slide has flowed through to those trusts that are struggling to balance their budgets and obviously have fallen back into deficits as a result of the challenging year that 2023 brought. Now, some of the things you're going to hear about today, you're going to know. They're going to be very obvious. Energy costs, of course, we know they've gone up. We know they have. It's horrendous. There's some slides on energy costs. Some other things we're going to have a look at. But actually, in addition to our benchmarking report, we actually surveyed an awful lot of our clients last year and asked questions about what they thought about the sector, what were key things that were worrying them, what they were doing for the future. And we've had a response from a lot of our trusts about whether they're looking to grow. And you'll see that 73% of trusts are looking to grow. And we've got a bigger slide and a better slide to talk about in a few moments about trust growth. Obviously, we've got some issues with staffing costs that we're going to go and talk about. And clearly a big issue last year was supply staff costs. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. When it comes to other key highlights that we'll go into a bit more detail, we've got centralization on the left-hand side, mat size, increased income, and GAG pooling. Again, specific slides, specific tables, specific comments on all of those areas to see exactly where we are. Just finishing off on the key highlights. There's an awful lot of information here, I'm sure you can see. 8% of revenue reserves have been designated. We've got 75% of trusts saying in the next 3 years they believe they're going to run out of reserves. I'm actually surprised it's 75%. I thought it would be a lot higher, to be honest with you. We've got a lot of trusts holding a lot of cash balances on the right-hand side here. And so there's a specific slide on cash balances we'll go through. And we've got a lot about recharges for mats and about that central charge. So we've got a lot to get through, a lot to talk about, and some of those things hopefully you'll find very, very important and interesting. So let's start with the falling of pupil rolls. Now, what you've got in front of you is a really, I call it, it's a horrible slide or a horrible table, to be honest with you. This is the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, population demographics as of 2018 and predicted to 2024. And the reality is we don't care. We don't care about all of this at the top. All we care about is this little bit at the bottom here, this little bit that shows the ages of pupils that are going to start flowing through into the educational sector. And I know it's really hard to see this, and I've got a much better slide to follow. But actually, the trend is, and you can probably just see it at the bottom, that actually there's a drop in pupil rates. There's going to be a drop in pupils coming, and we've already started to see that. But that's just the start of the problem that's coming now. Now, the issues we got is school funding. Last year was actually up 50.8 billion compared to 46.7. I'm sure you didn't feel like you had more income, although actually you did ever so slightly. But what's going to happen when fewer pupils start flowing through the educational sector? Is there going to be a drop in funding? We'll have to wait and see exactly what happens. Obviously, we've got some concerns as these pupils start flowing through and roll numbers start dropping. Even the best schools amongst us may see some drop in numbers, even if we're oversubscribed. We're not talking small amounts of numbers here. By 2032, there is expected to be a drop in over 800,000 pupils in the educational system. That's a significant drop, and not one we're used to. We're used to numbers going up. We're not used to numbers going down. So there's a lot of concerns about falling rolls coming. You probably didn't believe me when I said I had a better slide to show the trend. Well, this is the trend in front of you now. And what you're seeing here is the top line, the lighter blue line, is primary effectively. And you can see it peaked around here. And actually there's a little bit of a peak there. And now there's a forecasted significant drop. Obviously, secondary schools are lagging behind. There's a lag between pupils going from primary to secondary. They've yet to see their peak. Their peak will hopefully come in 2025, but naturally then they'll see their trend falling down as well. So there's a bit of a concern over what impact these trends will have over the next few years, and a big impact on secondary schools because they'll be looking at reducing their cost ever so shortly, depending on where their numbers are going to lie in sort of 3, 4, 5 years' time. Moving on to reserves and movements. We've got a lovely graph here over the average free reserves, not total reserves, so we're excluding capital, we're using fixed asset reserves here. We're talking about free reserves that you can effectively spend for the end of 23, comparing it for the last 3 years. Obviously, it varies significantly depending on the size of the mat. The bigger the mat, of course, there will be more reserves. There's more schools within. But on the whole, those reserves have gone up. We all know that there's some concerns that schools are sat on too much cash, too much reserves. When you have a look at this, you often understand why. Because on paper, on black and white, it does look like mats are sat on a lot of free reserves. If I go to the medium mats, more than £3 million on average at the end of 2023's worth of reserves. That's gone up quite significantly compared to the previous years. There has been a drop in the large mats. I think there's been a bit of a focus on larger mats actually spending the reserves and having to justify it a bit more, just because it's an easier and a quick win probably for the ESFA to focus on 1 or 2 or 3 really, really large mats than hitting the smaller mats and having those individual conversations over their reserves. But where's the movements gone between those reserves? As you can see on the screen now, most reserve movements have gone down quite significantly this year because of the challenging year. And you can see the movements in the years over the last 3 years of those average free reserves. In other words, the surpluses that have gone into the reserves year on year. And this year has been absolutely horrendous, I must say. You can just compare it. Let's take that secondary SAT. In 2022, they put £103,000 into their reserves. They've only put 6 in 2023 on average. That's a drop of over 94%. And most people are showing significant drops. It doesn't matter whether you're a small or a large mat. These aren't 5 or 10% drops in the movements. These are huge movement drops. Actually, I'm quite surprised by the top one there, the mat one, the primary mat, because actually only went down by 10%. Clearly, primary mats on average are running deficit, so they're controlling their budgets a bit tighter. But it is actually a startling result that actually every single type of multi-academy trust has seen the budget squeezed quite dramatically in 2023. I don't think that was hugely unexpected, but I don't think we appreciated the amount of squeezing that had gone on in the sector. Carrying on to reserves and free movements, the department has issued some guidance over what it deems unacceptable, I'll choose my words carefully, reserve movements here, and reserve balances rather than movements. I think we all know that actually if we got reserves of less than 5%, there's concerns. So we've obviously surveyed lots of schools, we've looked at lots of schools, and this bit here represents the schools that have got reserves, or the trusts that have got reserves that are less than 5% of their total income. So a concern for the ESFA, potentially leading to a notice to financially improve if they're not carrying enough reserves. Equally, on the opposite end of the spectrum over here, you've got the ones that are carrying reserves more than 20% of their income. And again, from a DFE point of view, there's questions over why are you carrying those level of reserves? Have you got a reason for it, i.e. you've got a building project that you're having to contribute significantly going forward? Or is it actually you're just sat on those reserves? And if you are, there's going to be some questions asked over why. But you can see, even with the slides here, that the vast majority of trusts are sat within the middle bracket, really, the sort of between 5 and the 20%. And there's been not much movement, to be honest with you, over the last 2 years, other than more people have slipped into the 0 to 5%, which I think represents the challenging year we've had in 2023, and less people have come out of the holding significant reserves at the top end. Now, you're probably not convinced over cash balances and reserves. You're probably saying, Alex, we feel like we don't have enough reserves. We feel like we're probably more towards the lower end. Well, cash balances is also a good indication of your trust status when it comes to finances. Now, I understand that Academy Trusts normally have very healthy cash balances. Lots of their income is paid in advance. That means at one point in time, which is the 31st of August 23, of course, you're going to show money in the bank because you should be showing money in the bank, really. But what are the averages? And this one always shocks me when I see it. This is why there is concerns via government and pressure put onto the department over trusts holding on to too much cash, because we're not talking insignificant sums of money here. We are talking lots of sums of money. I have just had a question again just to confirm what is the definition of small, medium and large mat. So I will just repeat it for the question I've got. A small mat is less than 3,000 pupils. A medium is between 3,000 and 7,500 pupils, and a large mat is more than 7,500 pupils. So let's have a quick look at these cash balances. So large mats, on average, they're holding on to more than £13 million of cash. Now you can probably understand why there are some eyebrows being raised here over cash balances. If we get down to the lower end, the smaller mats, we're still talking significant sums of money, £1.8 million. And even on to single secondaries, 1.3, single primaries, more than £500,000 worth of cash held. These are not insignificant sums of money. If we do it on a pupil by pupil basis, you will see on average, it's around about £1,100 per pupil. Obviously, larger mats are going to have larger amounts of money in their bank account at the end of the year. They have more schools within. It's all relative. But the average per pupil is around about £1,150 to £1,170 per pupil. But these are significant numbers we are talking about. I'm going to move on to financial sustainability, and this is part of the governance section within our benchmarking report. And there's a slide I'm going to talk about that I actually haven't got in front of me now, but I thought it was worthwhile mentioning that is within the report. In the governance section is a whole host of information that you can read about. I don't want to just replicate all of our comments in our report, but there's one thing that is really interesting. That is actually something that's come from the NGA, the National Governance Association, about the age demographics of boards of trustees and governors that potentially sit within schools. And I wasn't overly surprised by what the survey sort of reported to us all, but it does raise some concerns. What did it say? That actually almost 50% of all trustees boards are made up of people that are age 60 or over. That's a bit of a large number. If we add 50 or over, that jumps to nearly 70%. As for the people that are under 40, they make up less than 7% of a trust board. So I know it's easier for people that are retired and don't have a full-time job to help and support schools, but clearly the demographic or group of trustees is weighted towards the older category than the younger category. I'm not saying that's wrong. I just think that's rather interesting. Moving on to financial sustainability. I said earlier on that we surveyed a lot of our trusts to see what concerns they had. And I don't think you'll be surprised by this slide in front of you now. The biggest challenge that they reported to us was actually managing teaching costs and non-teaching costs. So in other words, staff salaries. Surprisingly, I thought most people would not be aware of the falling role dilemma that's coming. But actually, a lot of our trusts responded to say they were very fully aware of it and were extremely concerned about it. Unsurprisingly, we've got energy costs creeping in here and some other items coming in. So we've got concerns about staffing costs, concerns about role that then impacts on obviously our income, And obviously energy cost is still a problem that affects every single trust and every single school at the moment, given that it doesn't feel like those costs have gone down at all. Let's move on to growth now. Now, we surveyed a lot of trusts, and 73% of those trusts said they were going to grow. That's a very large number. However, it's actually gone down quite significantly. Last year, the same survey reported 92% of trusts looking to grow. What we are finding now is, especially some of the trusts that have grown, the ones that have taken on sponsors, the ones that have taken on challenging schools, are now looking to consolidate their position. They're looking to step back, see how things are going, support those schools, and not take on more. You'll see from the slide at the bottom there, the total number of schools looking to grow by. And actually, if I compare it to the previous year, there's quite a number that are looking to grow between 1 and 3, quite a lot that are not looking to grow at all. And then you've got this group up here that are looking to go significantly. On the whole, the ones that are looking to grow between 4 and above are much larger established mats. They're the large mat categories, where actually 4 schools is insignificant to their 45 schools that they've got in. What I do get concerned about is when you've got a 4 or 5 school mat, and then suddenly you're taking on another 4. That's a huge increase in schools within your mat, and how are you going to support them? How are you going to manage it? How's your team going to cope? Have you got all of your policies, procedures? Have you got your strategy in place to deal with it? I get very concerned when I see almost schools trying to run when they really should be walking when it comes to bringing more schools on within their trust. The averages now, the average number of schools in a mat has crept up ever so slightly, 10.5 this year. If you're below that, you're a slightly smaller mat. If you're above that, you're a bigger mat. The reality is it is skewed because we have a number of really, really large mats in England. We have a number of very chunky ones. They skew the figure a little bit and make that look a little bit higher. So I wouldn't be concerned if you turned around and said, actually, we've got less than 10, significantly less than 10. We've only got 6. Well, actually, I wouldn't be too worried about that because there are a number of trusts that have a lot of schools within, especially a lot of primaries. I'm going to move on to pooling now. We're talking about GAG and reserve pooling. If you have sat on my any one of my webinars before, I've spoken about GAG and reserve pooling many, many times. I've talked about the pros and cons. I've talked about what other schools are doing. I'm not saying it's right for everybody. It never is. However, it is starting to become more and more common. And as you can see from the slide in front now, 42% of larger mats are GAG pooling, 29% of medium mats, and 17% of smaller mats. And that trend is an upward trend. You're probably thinking right in this middle here, Alex, the medium mat has gone down. No, the reality is lots of these schools here are flipped into larger mats. So you've almost got a little bit of a transition period. If we put those schools back down here into the medium mat, you'll suddenly see there was an upward trend in every single area here. Obviously, GAG pooling it's an interesting topic and not one that I'm going to talk about today, but the trend is very, very clear. If you haven't considered it, if it hasn't been on your agenda, consider it. If you're not doing it, you should at least be talking about it. You can easily dismiss it, of course, that is your choice, but you certainly should be talking about it. I'm going to move on to centralization now. We deem centralization 3 ways when it comes to how your trust is managed centrally. We've got fully centralized. That means all the functions are taken out of the schools and done by a central team. You've got a combination, which is a little bit is done at school level, but maybe you've got most of it done centrally, and then you've got fully decentralized, where actually you've got lots of things going on in the individual school levels. Maybe they're putting on all of their invoices, accounting for all of their expenditure as such, and then it obviously goes off to the central team. So we split it up between those 3 categories, and it's very clear now there is a trend to full centralization. Fully decentralized, virtually non-existing now. The combination is dropping down Year on year, it seems to be dropping down whilst the full centralisation is going up. And what we are seeing is that full team, that central team is often not being based in a school. It's not based in one of your schools, taking up a room or two. It's based on a business park. It's based somewhere else. And often lots of members in that team are working from home and then just dipping in and out of individual schools as and when they need to. But they're not based in a school, taking up valuable resources, time, effort, and being distracted in a school environment. They are often at a completely different location. I think that trend will continue, and I think we'll find even more trusts become more and more centralized going forward. I'm going to move on to income now. And this is where the slides seem to get a bit bland. And I say bland because we've gone from having lovely colours to almost black and white. Don't ask me why. They should have made them lovely purple or something here. But you may not believe me when I say that your income last year had gone up. The average total income per pupil was higher. If I break it down even more, I haven't done on the slides today, but you can do in the report, then you will find the money from government, you may not feel it, did go up. On the whole, why did it go up? Well, the COVID recovery grants is the main reason for that. This is obviously total revenue per pupil, so this includes other income as such, and you will see it has gone up. Every single area has gone up effectively. Some a little bit more than others, but the revenue has gone up. But as you saw before on the very first slide, surpluses dropped. That means expenditure must have gone up significantly in the year to account for all of those surpluses dropping this year. I'm going to move on to costs, if I may. I'm going to talk about that big issue that every one of you or every one of those people that responded to our survey had concerns over, and that was staff costs, really. So 93% indicated that the biggest financial challenge coming forward was managing staff costs. I'm not surprised. Are you really surprised? That doesn't come as a surprise to me. A real big concern that I've got, and I don't know whether you spotted it, and I don't know whether you know about it. Obviously, we know that the teachers' pension contribution employers rate is increasing from April 24. So in effectively a month's time, it's going from 23.6% to 28.6%. That's a massive 5% increase on your total wage bill for teachers. The concern is it's only been confirmed that'll be funded for 1 year. So my question is, what happens after the 1 year? Is it going to be snuck in that you're having to cut your costs to meet that extra 5% employer pension liability? I hope not. I can only pray that the funding continues there. But at the moment, the confirmation is it's 1 year only. Good luck planning for that second and third year. I suspect your budget forecast returns that you're going to do in a few months' time are going to be absolutely horrendous, because effectively you have to plan for no income there. You have to plan that your second and third year will have no income for the extra additional contributions you're having to make into the teacher's pension scheme. That's going to have a huge impact on your budget, and it's going to make balancing those budgets in that second and third year for the budget forecast return, well, I'm not going to use the word impossible, but it's close down to it, I'm sure. Now, the one surprising thing I had when it came to staff cost was the percentage of staff costs as a result of total costs, really. And you can see from the slides here that the overall percentages for staff costs have gone down quite significantly. Average 3 years ago, we can say, doesn't matter where you sat, it was around about 75% of your budget was on staff costs. Now, that's getting closer to 70%, really, 71 arguably, but not an insignificant drop. This is a massive amount of your budget, and now you're having to cut it to meet your expectations, your balancing budget. We know full well that you've got teacher ratios that you have to meet. So where is that coming from? You're clearly having to cut costs elsewhere. When I say elsewhere, I'm still talking about the staffing budget. So I'm talking about TAs, I'm talking about support staff, I'm talking about admin staff. There must have been a drop for that to go down so much. So if you think that you're suffering and you've had to effectively have less TAs or less support staff in your school, you're not the only one. to be honest, everybody's staffing costs and average of total costs have gone down, because if you're looking to balance that budget and you've got tens of thousands of pounds to save, the reality is there is only one pot you can try and save it from, and that is on average the staff pot. I'm going to move on to CEOs and CFO salaries now. You remember a few years ago that the DfE had concerns about CEO salaries, and almost saying we're not happy that CEO salaries are more than £100,000, and then it went to 150, and there was some concerns, and almost trying to put trusts off by saying they have to disclose them on their website, they have to put them in their financial statements, make them bold so people can see it. Well, unsurprisingly, CFO salaries have gone up again. However, there's been no other concerns raised. There's been no other comments raised that I'm aware of about the level of increases in the average CEO salaries. The average salaries for large mats, if I take you to that right-hand side, now £179,000 on average. Huge sum of money. For smaller mats, we'll go to this table here, £118,000. A lot higher than £100,000 that was the initial concerns. And these are the averages. There are some mats that pay significantly higher than the figures you can see on this screen here. And the trend on the whole has been an upward trend. Larger mats, less so, but you have extremes with larger mats. Some are paid very large salaries, some are paid lower salaries. If I show you the average CFO salaries, the picture here is much blurred, I must say, when it comes to the CFO salaries. Whilst you can say there has been some increases in CFO salaries, I think the main issue we have here is the quality of CFOs in the sector. Clearly, there are lots of very capable financial people out there. There are lots of very capable accountants. There are also lots of very capable people that have experience in the education sector. Trying to then put the two together is really, really hard. So trying to find a CFO that is not just capable when it comes to their knowledge in finance, i.e. an accountant or an accountant equivalent, but also has the skill set in education makes it very, very difficult. And lots of my trusts are saying to me it's really, really hard to get good quality CFOs. Now, I thought that might increase their salaries, but the reality is I don't think it has so far. I do think these salaries that are reported down here, all the averages, I think they're a little bit light, to be honest with you. And that means that quality might not be there because the salaries are a little bit too low. It's a personal view more than anything else. Do I think they should be at these sort of levels? Oh, no, not at all. But should they be closer to the £100,000 mark? Potentially, yes. Would you have more quality? Would you have an increased caliber? Potentially there. And obviously those CFOs that are online with me today would be much happier if there was an increase in the CFO average salary levels. Going to move on now to supply costs. Supply costs are a big concern. Now, the DfE reported that 67% of teachers took sickness absence in 2022 year. Obviously, our data is normally a year ahead of theirs, so they're reporting on 2022. We don't know what 2023 was like. That went up significantly from the previous year. Obviously, that meant more supply costs. And supply cost per pupil does seem to have increased quite significantly. You can see the trend. I don't think you'd be surprised by it. The trend on the whole has been an increase on the previous year. Primary SATs seem to have gone down. I'm a bit concerned about why that's gone down. It might be just isolated incidents here. But on the whole, there's been a large increase in the average supply costs per pupil. The next slide is all about heat and light. And what do I need to say on heat and light? I probably need to say absolutely nothing other than, of course, you know it's horrendous. Of course, you know that when you came out of your contract, your heat and light bill just doubled overnight. Well, just look back and 3 years ago and just see how that doubling has impacted. The average heat and light cost per pupil has more than doubled over the last 3 years, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. I don't think I want to focus anymore on that one because it just makes me depressed. I'm going to move on to internal audits now. We've got a section in the benchmarking report all about internal audits. And I've just cherry picked one real slide and one real part of this section, which is all about some of the themes that are coming out of the reviews with internal audits. So some of the things that we're saying are not right when we are looking, acting as the internal auditors, or where the external auditors and the internal auditors send us their report. We obviously have to review it. We have to have a look at it at the end of the year when it goes off for submission there. And what are the common themes that we are seeing? Well, there's a huge amount of development within internal audits. That's the good news. Effectively, when it comes to internal audits, it's developed very, very nicely, I think, over the last few years. It started off just being about financials. And being an accountant, obviously, I love financials. I'm more than happy to report on financials. It's developed far beyond that. Internal audit now is about everything. It's not just about your financial aspects. I think we all know that we should be talking about safeguarding an internal audit. We should be talking about IT. We should be talking about staffing. We should talk about well-being. We should be talking about all of that as well as the financials. I get very annoyed when I hear about accountants and auditors reporting on internal audits and saying that they're experts in IT. We are experts in finance. We are not experts in IT. Equally, we are not experts in health and safety. We're not experts in building surveying. We should not be commenting on all of those aspects. You should always have an expert to cover off those elements of any internal reviews and internal audits you have. But let's have a quick look at some of those points that are coming up month on month, quarter on quarter, year on year when it comes to internal audits. And I'm going to cherry pick one or two of these points just to talk about. Register of interests. Most people, when it comes to the register of interest, talk about register of interest for the head teachers and register of interest for the trustees and the members, but you should also have register of interest for all of your senior staff or those with some sort of budget responsibility. If you haven't, you should. It's a common theme not to have one. This one is one that we found last year. We seem to come across a significant number of trusts that had issues with appointment and registration dates. It's a common thing to get wrong. It's so easy to get wrong. It's so easy to forget. What were the things that we saw? We found that members had often been reported as trustees at Companies House. So logged as trustees as Companies House, well, they're members. They shouldn't be. We often see that actually members and trustees aren't shown on GAIAS and not updated. We see trustees think they're trustees and they're shown nowhere. And we also see trustees that have been resigned a couple of years ago still shown on Companies House and on GAIAS. So a whole host of issues going on around the appointment and resignation of members and trustees and keeping all of the places up to date. Effectively, there's three places from our side. We're talking about your website should always be up to date, GAIAS should always be up to date, and Companies House should always be up to date. You should be filing the appointment and resignation forms within a timely manner. What would I say is a timely manner? Normally within 14 days of appointment. There are other things that there are issues that we find when it comes to internal audits. A big one I always hate is the fixed asset registers. When we take on a new client, when we take on a new trust and we say, can we see a fixed asset register? And all we get is a list of all of the assets that they say they own. I'm afraid that's not a true fixed asset register. It should show every single asset with every single cost and how those assets have been funded, whether they were funded through GAG, whether they were funded through SIF funding, whether they were funded through DFC. It is key to understand how they are funded, and that fixed asset register should be maintained and reconciled back to your monthly management accounts information. Often it is not, and it does cause some major issues at the end of the year. I'm going to move on to benchmarking your own trust. You can download or get a copy of our full report. It's got all the key information when it comes to the financial breakdowns of the figures. And that enables you to compare your school and your trust here. So please download that. It is there. You can sort of look at every single item that you want to and cherry pick the ones you don't want to have a look at. But all the data is there across every single one that we've done. Now I'm going to move on now to trustees' reports and the financial statements, and just spend a couple of minutes just talking about trustees' reports really. Now we all know full well that the audit season is over. We breathed a sigh of relief at the end of the year. All the reports were submitted, the accounts were done, the ARs have been done, we're all happy. However, there does seem to be a bit of common theme now about trustees' reports. We all hate writing them. I hate sending all of my clients the template for the trustees' report saying, please, can you fill it in and send it back to me? I know it's horrible. I know so much time and effort has to be done for it, but it's one of those things. And there is a template. You have to follow certain rules and regulations. What a lot of people are talking about now is developing that trustees' report to give an awful lot more than just the statutory information. So making it more like a selling point of your trust, making it more visual, making it more attractive, making it feel a bit like a prospectus. So if you're looking at the financial statements, the first 10, 15 pages is a bit more visual, not as dull and boring as the remaining 60 odd pages that the accounts are. And that's coming from me. And I produce them and read them and write them, really. So a lot of trusts are looking to do that now. They're looking to almost build a prospectus and put it in to the financial statements as part of the trustees report. Of course, you have to include certain things in the trustees report, but there's nothing stopping you putting more in. You can put as much in as you want to. You just can't take certain things out of it. So that's a key thing that a lot of individuals are now looking to do before we get to the end of the year, so they can give to their accountants and auditors and say, actually, I know I've got all the statutory bit of the trustees report to do, but I want this 10 pages or so, or these 4 pages, whatever it is right for your trust, to go in to become a little bit of a selling point to anybody that looks at our financial statements to show that actually we're pretty good and this is what we do. I'm going to move on now to benefits in kind and staff incentives, just because it just seems to be getting traction now within the sector. I've had lots of questions in the last 12 months about, can I give my staff X? Is it contentious for me to consider having a benefit scheme for the staff? I'm really struggling to get some staff in this area. What can I do to help them join my trust? There are so many questions I get asked about benefit in kind now. It's unbelievable, really. So I just thought it's worthwhile just talking about them just for 2 minutes about what are benefits in kind, what happens with them, what you need to consider. So this is where you give your staff something on top of their wages and salary. We have 2 types of benefits in kind. Ones that are called taxable benefits in kind. What do I mean by that? It means it doesn't matter what you give to the employee, they will be taxed on it. You will also suffer a bit of tax. I'm saying tax, that is national insurance, to be honest, if I'm going to be technically correct, but it is, at the end of the day, a tax. Common benefits in kind: company car, private health insurance, dental insurance, gym membership. If I were to say what is the most common now with the academies that I see that provide benefits in kind, I'm not saying benefits in kinds for academy schools are common at the moment. I think if I did a survey, I'd probably see probably around about a quarter of them offered benefits in kind. But the most common one is actually these 2, health insurance and dental insurance being provided by trusts. Company cars, less so, although there are salary sacrifice schemes that lots of people are making good use of. Obviously, all of these result in tax, but do save the employee money at the end of the day if they were going to pay for private health care or private dental care or a gym membership at the end of the day. Now, there are ones that are what I call common non-taxable ones, the ones that don't cost the employee any money. The obvious ones here: mobile phones, laptops, and we've got what I call trivial benefits. You can have trivial benefits given to employees as long as they cost £50. They're not a reward for performance and they're non-contractual. And there are lots of comments about the use of perk box or those type of benefit schemes, and you need to see whether it's right for you, for your trust, if you are considering them. Updates and reminders. This is just about what we've got coming up in the next few months. We've got the school resource management self-assessment checklist. Oh my gosh, I always hate saying that. Even the acronym I can't say. You've got to the 15th of March to do it, so a couple of weeks time. That is due. Please don't miss it. On the same day, you've got your admission arrangement that must be published on your website, and you must make the submission to the LA at the same time. Effectively, that's due on the 15th of March. At some point, we will have the new Academy Accounts Direction and Model Accounts given to us this month. I don't think it's come out just yet. Obviously, it's the first day of the month, but that will be due out ever so shortly, so we can see what we should be doing when it comes to August, and whether there's anything we need to collate more data between now and then to comply with those two documents. We've got the BFR workbook and guidance being issued in April, although that's not due for a couple of months thereafter. It'll be worthwhile looking at that guidance and workbook just to start the BFR, because I do think there's going to be some major concerns over budgeting for the next year or two. And then please, whatever you do, don't forget to submit those financial statements to Companies House. If you've not already done so, they're due by the 31st of May. It's a common error with all of the rush to get the accounts to the DFE by the end of the year, normally before Christmas. In reality, everybody forgets to submit the financial statements. For ours, all of ours are done. For anybody that's on the webinar today, where we are not your accountants or auditors, or we act as your internal auditors but not your external auditors, just please make sure that your financial statements are submitted at Companies House before that deadline. Now, I've taken 51 minutes according to my clock to go through that, so I have overrun by around about 6 minutes. Please forgive me. I do hope you found that useful. I hope there was one or two slides that made you question yourself, that made you question what's going on at your trust, or made you want to look into something. Please do download the benchmarking report. There is so much more information in there. Share it with your colleagues, share it with your trustees. If you want some hard copies, just drop me an email. We will send some hard copies out as well. It's been lovely to have you here today. And obviously, if you've got any questions, just drop me an email. Take care, and we'll speak to you again shortly.